The rain poured heavily over the city, blurring the bright lights and casting long shadows on the streets. Ryan Carter sat in the back seat of his sleek black car, his mind lost in thought as the world rushed past. To most people, he was a billionaire, a man who had everything. But despite his success, there was always something missing, a void that no amount of wealth could fill. He had spent years searching for the one person he had lost long ago, the woman who had meant everything to him, his mother. As the car slowed at a red light, Ryan's eyes wandered to the sidewalk. People hurried past, umbrellas shielding them from the downpour. But then, something caught his attention. A frail, elderly woman, hunched over, digging through a trash bin with trembling hands. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her thin frame, and her movements were slow, desperate. Ryan felt an unexpected pull toward her, a strange sense of familiarity he couldn't explain. "Stop the car," he said suddenly, his voice firm. His driver, Sam, hesitated for a moment before pulling over to the side of the road. "Sir, is everything all right?" Ryan didn't answer. He pushed open the door, stepping out into the rain. The cold droplets soaked through his coat. But he didn't care. His focus was locked on the woman as he approached her, his heart pounding in his chest. There was something about her, something he couldn't shake. "Excuse me," he said gently. The woman flinched at the sound of his voice. Slowly, she turned to face him, her weary eyes meeting his. And in that instant, the world seemed to stop. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. Her face, though aged and weathered by time and hardship, was painfully familiar. His hands trembled as he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a worn photograph he had carried for years. A picture of himself as a young boy, standing beside his mother. With a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke the name that had haunted him for decades. "Catherine Carter. Is that your name?" The woman's eyes widened as she took the photograph with shaking hands. She stared at it, her lips quivering, her face etched with disbelief. How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice breaking. Ryan's vision blurred with tears. His entire world shifted in that moment, the years of pain, loss, and unanswered questions crashing down on him all at once. Because his voice cracked, his emotions overwhelming him. "I'm Ryan. I'm your son." The woman gasped, her frail body trembling as she reached out, touching his face as if to confirm he was real. "Ryan. My Ryan," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. And just like that, a story that had been lost in time was about to unfold. A story of pain, sacrifice, and a reunion no one could have ever expected. But what Ryan didn't know was that this moment was only the beginning. Because the truth about what happened all those years ago was far more shocking than he could ever imagine. Ryan held his mother tightly as the rain poured around them, his heart pounding against his chest. He had spent years searching for her, dreaming of this moment, but never in his wildest thoughts had he imagined finding her like this. Cold, frail, and living on the streets. The woman who once held his hand and wiped away his tears now looked like she had suffered a lifetime of pain. "Mom, you're coming with me," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. He carefully helped her into his car, wrapping his coat around her shivering shoulders. She barely spoke, still overwhelmed by the shock of seeing her son after so many years. Her hands clutched the old photograph, her fingers tracing the edges as if she were afraid it would disappear. As the car pulled away from the dark streets, Ryan stole glances at her, still struggling to believe this was real. Memories of his childhood flashed in his mind. The warmth of her embrace. The way she sang to him when he was scared. The way she promised to always be there. But one day, she wasn't. One day she was gone. And his whole world collapsed. He had been just 9 years old when he woke up to find her missing. No note, no goodbye, just an empty apartment and a life thrown into chaos. He had waited for her, believing she would return. But days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and eventually, he was forced into the harsh reality of surviving alone. The car ride was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from his mother. Ryan wanted to ask her a million questions, but he didn't know where to begin. When they arrived at his mansion, the grand doors swung open, revealing the life he had built for himself. The warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the cold, night outside. His mother hesitated at the entrance, glancing around with uncertainty. "This is your home now," Ryan assured her gently. "You'll never have to suffer again." A deep sadness flickered in her eyes as she stepped inside. She was overwhelmed, not just by the luxury of the house, but by the realization of how much time had passed. That night, as she sat by the fireplace wrapped in a soft blanket, Ryan finally asked the question that had haunted him for years. "Mom, what happened to you? Where did you go?" His mother took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with tears. "I never wanted to leave you, Ryan," she whispered. "I fought so hard to stay with you. But life wasn't kind to me." She paused, her hands trembling. "I lost my job, and with it, everything we had. I tried to find help, but no one cared. I begged for work, for a place to stay, but the world turned its back on me. And then, someone took me away." Ryan's entire body tensed. "What do you mean, someone took you?" His mother's face darkened as she lowered her voice. "There were people, dangerous people. I owed money, and when I couldn't pay, they made sure I disappeared. I was taken far from the city, forced into a life I never chose. I tried to escape, but every time I did, they made sure I had nowhere to run. I was trapped for years, Ryan." Ryan's fists clenched. He had spent years blaming himself, thinking maybe he had done something wrong, thinking maybe she had abandoned him. But now he realized the truth was far worse than he had imagined. His mother wiped her tears. "When I finally broke free, you were gone. I searched for you, Ryan, for years. I walked through every street, checked every shelter, but it was like you vanished. And after a while, I lost hope." Ryan's chest ached. The thought of her suffering alone, searching for him, while he had been searching for her, was almost too much to bear. "But now I found you," she said, reaching for his hand. "And that's all that matters." Ryan swallowed hard. No, this wasn't all that mattered. The people who had done this to her, the ones who had stolen years of her life, they were still out there, and he couldn't just let that go. As much as he wanted to focus on the present, on the miracle of having his mother back, one thing burned deep in his heart. He had to find out the truth. He had to make sure those responsible would never hurt her again, and he would do whatever it took to make that happen. Ryan barely slept that night. He sat in his study, staring at the fire, his mother's words echoing in his mind. She had suffered alone, trapped, and powerless, while he had grown into one of the most powerful men in the country. And yet, for all his wealth and influence, he had never been able to find her. The thought made his blood boil. Whoever had taken her, whoever had stolen their years together, had to be held accountable. The next morning, Ryan called in one of his most trusted investigators. If there was any chance of finding out who had done this to his mother, he would take it. Hours turned into days as they pieced together the missing years of Catherine Carter's life. What they found made Ryan's stomach turn. A name surfaced: Vincent Malone. A known loan shark who preyed on struggling families, forcing them into impossible debts. He had disappeared years ago, but his past crimes were still whispered about in the darkest corners of the city. Ryan's mother had been one of his victims. When she couldn't pay, she was taken, held captive, forced to work for nothing, and kept in a cycle of fear until she finally broke free. But by then, the world had moved on, and she was left with nothing but memories of the son she had lost. Ryan sat in silence as he processed the truth. His hands curled into fists. He had built his life on power, control, and justice. Now, he had the chance to make things right. But his mother had other plans. "Ryan," she said gently, placing a hand on his. "I know what you're thinking. But I don't want revenge. I just want to move forward." Ryan met her gaze, searching for any trace of anger, of resentment. But all he saw was peace. She had lost everything, yet she wasn't asking for justice. Just a second chance at life, and in that moment, Ryan understood. Revenge wouldn't change the past. It wouldn't give them back the years they had lost. But what they did next could change the future. That evening, Ryan and Catherine stood in front of the newly built Second Chance Foundation, the place that would serve as hope for those who had suffered as she had. A place where no one would be turned away, where people could rebuild their lives, find shelter, and get back on their feet. As Catherine cut the ribbon, tears glistened in her eyes. She looked at Ryan, her son, no longer a lost boy, but a man who had turned pain into purpose. "You gave me my second chance," she whispered. "Now let's give it to others." Ryan smiled, pulling her into a hug. Together. The crowd erupted in applause, but for Ryan, the true victory was standing right beside him. He had spent years searching for his mother, only to find that she was the missing piece of his heart. And now, with her by his side, they were finally home.